The first question we must ask ourselves prior to any attempt at deciphering was, who or what is the woman of Revelations 12? Interestingly enough, from all the prophecies of St. John, this was the one prophecy that most had correctly identified as a metaphoric reference for the Vatican. The reason thereto was nothing difficult, for we find it in Revelation 17, verse 9. Revelation 17, verse 9 reads, "And here is the mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, on which the woman sitteth." This reference provided a geographical link between the 7 hills and the reference woman. From this reference, the majority of biblical scholars had correctly concluded that the 7 mountains referenced the city of Rome. Should we explore history a bit further, we shall find that the city of Rome was built over a series of 7 hills. As the Vatican was located within the precincts of the city of Rome, in the mind of many biblical scholars, the Vatican and the city of Rome was one and the same. Whilst technically not a valid mindset, for the purpose of these prophecies, it will serve. St. John facts remain a valid tool to establish a link between the reference woman via the fact 7 hills that he provided in the text to arrive at the Vatican via the city of Rome. However, there was more to the reference woman than purely an identifier for the Vatican. Let us revisit the text to Revelations 12. If we read the text carefully, we will be astounded at the amount of information embedded therein. Revelations 12 verse 1 reads as follows. "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars." The first fact that we recognize is the familiar reference, "great wonder in heaven." From the preceding videos, we should by now be familiar with the reference, for in the earth domain, it confirmed the prophecy was obtained by means of a presentation or briefing. Hence, we can directly proceed with the deciphering of the prophetic text. Let us first consider the basics. Was the factual pointer I saw present? Answer, yes. However, it was embedded in the reference "great wonder in heaven". Why is this reference so crucial? For the decipherer it was crucial because it confirms up front that he was confronted with a fact-based prophecy. This fact significantly narrows the scope of the research. If we now want to decipher the prophecy, the first step as per the Trinity key is to establish the domain in which the prophecy was set. When we apply the domain test, we shall see that the prophecy was set in the earth domain. This implied we must follow the earth domain leg of the Trinity key. The reference "a great wonder in heaven" now ended on a comma, unlike the preceding videos on the subject of the dragon and the beast where it had ended on a colon. This implied that for this prophecy the presentation has just started, and this was the first subject of this series of presentations. We can therefore continue with the deciphering process. To start with, we will only consider the text highlighted in white. And there appeared, confirmed, a new subject to follow. Great wonder in heaven confirms the presentation has just started and will now continue. Clothed with the sun. This reference confirmed that the sun was intimately related to the woman. The reference "moon under her feet" confirmed that the moon was also related to the woman, but it was subjugated to or by the reference woman. The reference "upon her head" means we need to look above or on top of her, a crown of 12 stars. The crown confirms kingship. However, this crown was unique, for it featured 12 stars. And we will come to the feature of the 12 stars later in the deciphering process. Now that we have the facts at our disposal, it was evident that it once again concerned a geopolitical entity. As enigmatic and confusing as it may seem, we need to calm down to a mild state of panic and remember two crucial facts. It was a fact-based prophecy, and St. John was trying his utmost to keep it as simple as possible. My personal response when confronted with such confusing facts was, "You got to be kidding me." However, St. John was a fervent adherent to the keep it straight and simple philosophy to life. We need to remember it was a fact-based prophecy. We need to consult history to extrapolate our answers, and in particular in this case, the apocalypse era. We now shift our focus to history. We shall discover that St. John facts are impeccable. Should we tackle the prophecy in bite-sized chunks and only consider the text highlighted in white, we shall recognize that the prophecy was a metaphoric identifier for Pope John Paul II. In the 11th century, Saint Malachi prophesied the tenure of each and every pope up to the demise of the Roman Catholic Church. Pope John Paul II, the third to last of the Vatican popes, was identified by the Latin title De Labore Solis, which translates into the English to labor in the sun or sun laborer. His bibliography stated that whilst working in the fields of his native Poland towards paying for his seminary studies, the young Karol Wojtyla suffered severe sunstroke and for many days lingered at death's door. Saint Malachi had used this fact to identify Pope John Paul II, and Saint John has used Saint Malachi's text in his own prophecy. The irony of the matter is that Saint John had utilized Saint Malachi's text 10 centuries before it was written. So having identified Pope John Paul, we can now shift to the rest of the prophecy, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And what we see is a geopolitical prophecy emerging. During the tenure of Pope John Paul II on the papal chair, the period 1978 to 2005, the European Union becomes a political and economic reality. And very interestingly enough, the Muslim threat axis shall shift from the Middle East to North Africa. And haven't we just seen the results of that shift for Europe? Should we continue to Revelation 12 verse 2, we are confronted with another familiar event, the child abuse scandal that shook the Vatican to its very foundations. Not only did St. John prophesy this shame when he wrote, "And she being with the child cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered." If we look at the reference, "she being with a child cried," it literally translates to when a priest, she, was left alone with the child. Note the use of the child singular in this context. The child would cry. In other words, be heard. It prophesies the child abuse scandal that rocked the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican during the tenure of Pope John Paul II. It also confirmed Pope John Paul II's reaction thereto. At first denial, then a slow, or as St. John describes it, travailing, and an agonizing, pained response to the scandal. His successor, Pope Benedict XVI, would be the first to account and act. Then in Revelations 19 verse 4, St. John really surprised. Revelations 19 verse 4 reads as follows. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Once again, we have a factual prophecy. Let's look at the solution. The reference dragon, as shall be seen in the later decipherings, identified the People's Republic of China. In this case, China stood before the woman. She stood before the Vatican. In other words, in conflict or in opposition to. The Vatican was ready to deliver something, a child. In other words, it referenced a papal election, a new pope. But now China came on the scene and demanded, evidently, if a certain pope was elected, he had to be murdered. And St. John confirmed in Revelations 19 verse 5, and she brought forth a man-child, in other words, a newly elected pope. Man-child, an adult male, was elected. However, the child reference identified he was new to the post, new to his appointment, who was to rule all nations, was to rule. He was elected to, but he never got the chance. All nations, globally, with a rod of iron. This man already had established a track record of a strict disciplinarian, a person that did not tolerate nonsense, that did not tolerate all of the travesties that was committed and still being committed under the protection of the Vatican. Her child, this newly elected Pope, caught up unto God. He was murdered. St. John confirmed that the People's Republic of China demanded in 1978 that the Vatican, if he was elected Pope, murder Pope John Paul I. Today, if we study the history of the Vatican, we shall read that 1 month after he was elected to the papal chair, Pope John Paul I passed away, and we can add, under suspicious circumstances. St. John is a lot more blatant. Pope John Paul I was murdered by his very own on demand of the People's Republic of China. We can now summarize these two prophecies as follows. During the tenure of Pope John Paul II, 1978 to 2005, the European Union becomes a political and economic reality, and the Muslim threat axis shall shift from the Middle East to North Africa. And the second prophecy stated that the People's Republic of China demanded that the Vatican, if it was elected Pope, murder John Paul I. We now confirm that the reference woman identified both the Vatican and the popes. I thank you for watching the video on the Revelation's reference, woman. I trust that you found St. John's woman prophecy as intriguing and as shocking as I did. It is not for us to judge. That right is the exclusive of God. But from these prophecies, I believe that some members of the Vatican are due to face some challenging times and experiences, probably some acute discomfort the day they meet their Creator. May God bless you today, tomorrow, and forevermore.